Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 109. I recently connected with Chris McGilvray, director of the documentary Eden. Eden follows Mount Eden winemaker Jeffrey Patterson and his family for over a period of 7 years. We dive into how he found himself shooting a film a couple thousand feet above Silicon Valley, growing up in the heart of the valley, his production and post-production process, and we fall into a discussion about creativity in general near the end. I hope you enjoy. Also wanted to let you know that tickets for Unfiltered are on sale. The festival is fast approaching on July 25th and 26th. And you can get tickets at donkeyandgoat.com/unfiltered. Also a reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast. The link is in the show notes too. If you're enjoying the podcast, any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. It's all run independently, much like the producers I talk with. Telling a friend or sharing on social media are great ways to help out too. Here we go. Well, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of came across the Mount Eden story and how you got involved in this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, it was a long journey. I mean, this, film, we spent 7 years filming it. And we started, a couple years even before that because in my day job, I basically make promotional content, branded films, 30 and 60-second spots, longer format pieces, between 2 to 5 minutes, that kind of stuff for online content. And so back in 2020 or 2015, I was hired by the Santa Cruz Mountain Wine Growers Association to track the 2015 vintage through the lens of 4 separate wineries. And those wineries were Mount Eden, Ridge Vineyards, Thomas Fogarty, and Storrs. And I didn't really know anything about wine. I mean, I, drank some wine and, enjoyed it, but I wasn't intellectually engaged in wine really in any way. I had a passion for agriculture. I'd done, a good amount of work in the agricultural field. And so that, kind of piqued the interest of the people of the Santa Cruz Mountain Wine Growers Association. And so I got to spend this whole year tracking the vintage and walking around and learning about wine, largely out in the vineyards with, some of the coolest and most fascinating people to learn about wine from. I got to spend a good amount of time with Paul Draper from Ridge Vineyards. Amazing. He was still there at that point. John Olney, Eric Barr, David Gates. And then on the Mount Eden side, getting to spend time walking around in the vineyard with Jeffrey Patterson was a pretty magical experience. And I was particularly drawn to sort of the time frame of wine. I think that was one of the things that really jumped out at me was, I had been doing a bunch of work in the tech industry. I grew up in Los Gatos, so I'm, from Silicon Valley. And everything that is tech focused is so immediate.
Right.
And when I would walk around in these vineyards, Jeffrey Patterson is thinking about things in terms of decades. And that was such a cool time frame for me. I'm somebody that likes to take a lot of time when I make a project like this. I like to consider it and let it breathe. And so getting to sort of see this magical world that's really like right above Silicon Valley. And, it's like a 15-minute drive from, the Apple campus. But it's, 2,000 feet above it. And it's a completely different rural agrarian existence. And then you're also seeing all of these, considerations of like, hey, if I'm going to, rip out this block and replant this particular block, we're looking at doing that one time in our entire lifetime. and that has to live on beyond us. And, that's like a, hopefully 75 to 100-year cycle. And I got so interested in that. That got pretty interesting.
You're kind of above Silicon Valley at that point, but
Yep.
in a way, it's kind of stepping back to the valley's history and in agriculture, and you get to see maybe a little glimpse of what it looked like, 100 years ago, and like
100%.
Ridge and Mount Eden, so much history at both of those places, and vines that long predate the proprietors that are there now.
Definitely. Mount Eden, you're talking, I think it's 1943 it was planted, and it's the, longest continuously produced Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in the country. They've produced a vintage, I think, every single year since 46. And so there's an incredible history there. And I was really attracted to it as a family-owned business. As somebody that does a lot of work with businesses, I was really interested in how you have a business, but then also consider, the family side of it. When it's a family-run business and you have so much complexity within the family dynamics, how does that factor into the business side? And I did this project in 2015, and I spent 2 years sort of thinking about it and working on a bunch of other stuff. And at the end of 2016, I approached the Pattersons with this idea that I was going to make this movie. And it was a very, very, I had no idea it was going to take us 7 years at that point. It was this idea where we were going to sort of track the 2017 vintage, because I knew that I really admired this wine, and I admired a lot of the incredible labor that goes into being able to produce an estate mountain wine in a region like this, which is not a predominantly wine, region. And I didn't really know necessarily much beyond that. And so we spent the year, and we, tracked that vintage and tracked the progression of the vines and all of the labor. And over the course of that year, I kept trying to cut different things, and it was all of this beautiful experiential footage, but it didn't have a story. It didn't have like a core human element. And at that, end of that year of 2017, I remember looking at some of the different edits that, we had, and it was like, this feels like a elevated promotional video from Mount Eden, which is 100% not what the intention was in any way. And so luckily, right at that point, I got a call from Ellie Patterson, who, is the president, runs Mount Eden on the business side. And she was like, hey, our son, Reed, has decided to come back and sort of, give it a shot and see whether or not he's, interested in sort of taking over the winery when, Jeffrey and I are ready to retire and sort of pass the reins on. And within, the first time that I met Reed, it got really interesting really quickly, because he's a very different person than his father in particular. Jeffrey's a very traditional, agriculturally driven, hardworking, sort of traditionally masculine, if the tractor breaks, I'll fix it myself kind of a dude. And Reed is a very cerebral and sort of philosophical person who doesn't necessarily thrive on manual labor. He really loves contemplation and thought and considering, sort of management, how you move all of the different, people that are working at the company to be able to make them work the best and accomplish the most. And so it was super fascinating to see that contrast. And also Reed was really so open about talking about the complicated feelings he had about growing up on this winery,
Yeah, so that kind of slowly revealed itself to become the story. When I guess
Yeah.
going back to that first vintage, the 2017, when you started it, did you have any kind of glimmer of a story in mind aside from capturing that vintage? Like, was the family dynamics or any larger picture
One of the
stuff?
things, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that always attracted me about Mount Eden, especially at the beginning, was that they didn't even have a tasting room.
Mm.
When, we're talking 2017, and this is a winery that's sort of so trapped in time that it almost had no D2C component. And it had a very, very small wine club, but no tasting room. You couldn't even really book a, semi-private tasting or anything. And I found that
Yeah.
fascinating. Right?
Yeah,
That is
just
so old school.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Especially in that area with
yeah.
all the tech and all the different ways you could run that kind of surrounding you, to not have any of that and not really care probably that they did it.
No,
Like
they were
things had been
perfectly
working
happy.
the way they
Sure.
had, everything been working
They
well.
were selling to restaurants, they were selling to wine shops. They, had good distribution and, multiple countries, multiple states. It was always something that had worked really well for them to not necessarily have that, sort of wine tasting experiential side of it. And the other thing I just found amazing is just the story of how Jeffrey and Ellie were able to become the primary owners of Mount Eden. This
Hmm.
idea that, Jeffrey gets there in 1981 and he had a little bit of experience. He had basically, I think, studied a little bit at Cal Poly and been a home winemaker, but he had very little experience and he was basically hired as like the cellar hand, kind of an assistant winemaker. It's a very different world where it was like
Hmm.
there's a winemaker and then an assistant winemaker. That was about it, right?
Yeah.
And so he didn't have a tremendous amount of experience. Ellie, wasn't working for Mount Eden at all. And within a year, basically the board fires the entire management group. It was
Well,
Dick Graff's company through Chalone,
hmm.
who was managing the entire property. And, basically everybody lost their job, and Ellie was able to convince one of the board members that, hey, Jeffrey really has a great shot at being able to make this wine and make great contributions. And we're young, we're cheap. We'd be happy to do this. Like, we're up here. We've
Yeah.
been up here for a year. Let us do it. And so, like, a year, a little bit over a year in, and all of a sudden they're handed the keys to this epic estate, Mount Eden, and Jeffrey gets to be the winemaker, and Ellie gets to, run the business side and the marketing side with, very, very little, business experience. And that's such an amazing story to me because it's like so never going to happen again at
Yeah.
this
Yeah. You
point in
really just have to
time, right?
fall
Like, Matt,
into
you're
it.
not,
Yeah. So
no,
random.
dude, you're
Yeah.
really not. You're not
Yeah.
gonna do that. So that was always something that I had loved. And then also growing up in the area, I grew up in Los Gatos, which is
Hmm.
the next town over from Saratoga. There was something very nostalgic about being up there because when you go up to Mount Eden, it's about the last mile and a half of that road is just a dirt road, a windy dirt road that's going almost straight up. I mean, people that go and visit, sort of freak out and turn around because they assume this cannot be the way to be able to arrive at, at Mount Eden. But it really is. It's this dirt road and you get up there and it's just a house that's up there that's surrounded by vineyards. And the film, really, tries to showcase that experience of being up on the top of the mountain. And it
Hmm.
feels like what I would imagine going and doing wine tasting and visiting would have felt like in, the late 70s or the early 80s. And so that felt really exciting and really cool.
In that way, I mean, we just said it, but it really is like just a throwback to an earlier time. And I guess one of the things that's interesting is the wine is just totally held up as a benchmark of Santa Cruz Mountains wine.
Sure.
Despite not having the tasting room or any of those amenities, it's still like top echelon and one of the most respected wines probably out of California.
Mm-hmm. And I think that part's really interesting because it's amazing because they produce a relatively small amount of it. So many people don't even know. Like people that are really into wine, obviously they all know Mount Eden and it has an incredible pedigree. But so many people that, just enjoy like wine tasting and more the lifestyle side of it, really have no idea that this incredible historic, wonderful producer that has been producing these age-worthy wines for so long is in their own backyard. So that was another part that I found really interesting.
Yeah, and really at the heart of the film, you kind of have the family and family dynamics and kind of the the will he, won't he succession plan with Reed. And I think that's one thing with Santa Cruz Mountains wineries that's always been a little bit of an issue, I feel like, is there's not always much of a succession plan in place, or so many of them are like just focused around one person, and then that person retires, passes away, and the winery goes away with it. And I feel like it's been especially acute in the Santa Cruz Mountains, more so than other places. But you want to talk a little bit about maybe that succession plan and Reed's thoughts on following his father's footsteps with it?
Yeah, no, I love to. I mean, one of the things that you said that gets me thinking is, the Santa Cruz Mountains. I've done a lot of work in the Santa Cruz Mountains with a lot of different wineries. And one of the sort of through points is this sort of, it attracts sort of rogue people that like their independence. And it's one of the things I love about the wines as well. They have, people like the wines, don't like the wines, they love them, they hate them, whatever. They're very unique and individual, man. And so there's this like sort of rogue nature to it, which I think then becomes a challenge on the succession side. And so where that sort of started to play out in this particular film is that like, and this was something that really spoke personally to me as someone who grew up in Silicon Valley, and I grew up, during kind of its original boom days. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Silicon Valley, and there was such a tremendous amount of growth. And one of the things that I think you sort of experience through this story, through the lens of both Reed and, Sophie, his older sister, is that they have this feeling that like they should go and do something that has never been done before, that their parents didn't necessarily set up for them. And, constantly be, sort of pushing past the frontier and creating the new thing. I mean, the culture of Silicon Valley is largely based on this idea of innovation and pushing past what, predated you and trying to come up with something that, your grandparents could never even dream of. And so that's like, this mythology that's sort of baked into you from a very, very young age. Now, it becomes a really interesting conflict when the very nature of your life is growing up with this estate that produces this very, very well-respected product that, sort of asks for a sense of legacy and a commitment to be able to continue the existing legacy that has already been there. And I think that there's just this really interesting conflict between sort of coming to terms with making your own mark and your own place in the world, but also being truthful and, committing to this family commitment and this legacy that is much, much larger and has been around a lot longer than you.
Yeah, that is a wild thing to think about, where instead of going for that new thing, breaking new ground in Silicon Valley, you're going above Silicon Valley, but this thing that changes super slow. I mean, you're planting vines often for your children. I mean, that's what Jeffrey's doing in the film. And even their wines tend to be long aged wines, both in barrel and bottle. And, I mean, Jeffrey might be gone by the time the wines he's making, the current vintage is like ready to drink, which is and I don't mean to say it like in a joking way or anything, but those are just, they're very long aged wines that last for a long time. And so to kind of keep that legacy going and kind of the family, I don't know, sort of that family job, like just kind of taking over the new generation. It doesn't seem like a wine probably people want to change, and it's got to be tough for Reed to kind of grapple with that.
Well, and it's also, it also mixes in this other component, which I think is, very central to the film, which is this conflict. I think in our culture, in the United States in particular, when you produce something that a lot of people admire, when it's a really admirable product and your craft that you are working on is so admirable, there's a tremendous amount of, pressure and encouragement to focus the vast majority of your energy on that craft and that, production. And the reality is that you only have so much energy and time in your life to be able to focus on anything. And so there's other things in your life that end up sort of being sacrificed when you do that. And so the children of, Jeffrey and Ellie Patterson have to, sort of deal with that conflict of realizing that their parents committed so much of their energy and their love and their passion and their time and their focus to the production of these wonderful Mount Eden wines. And so there's like a slight bit of resentment in that I think is very, very natural, because you are literally, especially from Reed's perspective, he talks a lot about if he wished to spend quality time with his father when he was younger, he had to go and work with him out in the vineyards. And, Jeffrey, as pretty much every winemaker ever, is like, oh my God, I have too much, that needs to be done and not enough labor to be able to do it. So now I get this cool opportunity to be able to have another laborer to be able to do it. And so it's this interesting sort of psychological dance where you experience that conflict of how do you make peace with the fact that you sort of have resentment for, this career that you're now being asked and, actually seriously considering taking on as your own career path. And then how do you make sure that you sort of balance it in a way that, assuming, let's imagine you have kids at some point, how do you make a better scenario for them? And it's like, that's, for me, that's where this film got really, really interesting, because I think that these are really like central questions about sort of American culture moving forward and how challenging it is to sort of balance your professional life and your personal life and your family life and your business life. And so I just got so fascinated by that.
Even the setting, and I mean, you have these great shots just looking over the valley, and you were just talking about driving up that 1.5 mile dirt road, but like they grew up surrounded, like totally surrounded by the business. It probably really wasn't even, like, in some ways it's more a lifestyle than a business, I guess. I mean, like the vineyards, the winery, and you're isolated. It's not like they were down in just a regular house in Cupertino or Sunnyvale, and you drive to work and you drive back. It's like everything is there. If there's a mountain lion in the vineyard, or like you know, you never know what's going to happen, and especially on a ridge top like that, it must just feel probably like all encompassing. I would imagine to grow up there.
I think that's a great way of putting it, and it's exactly what I would say, because it is, you know, winemaking in general, and I'm sure you know this, having interviewed so many winemakers, is an all-encompassing kind of profession. It's the kind of thing where you really have to have full commitment, because it's so time intensive, it's so labor intensive, it's so intellectually challenging, all of these things. And so that's just sort of expected of you. But if you combine that with like literally living in that environment and then trying to raise your family, like there's a really cool piece where, you know, Reed is talking about like he would watch his parents working so hard to produce all of this wine when he was a child. And it was something that he couldn't even take part in because, you know, he's not 21 yet. And so he's like, what is it that we're even making? What is all of this amazing, tremendous effort even for, you know?
Mm-hmm. I didn't really think about that, but yeah, you don't even really get an idea of what it is that's being produced as a child like that.
I think that makes it so hard because it's like, you know, his parents committed to this. Like they knew what they were making and they knew what their goal was. And so they sort of signed up for the tremendous amount of hard work that goes into being able to produce these high quality wines, because they put so much love and passion into the finished product. And the kids don't really understand that. And so then it's very challenging to be able to transfer that passion to the next generation, because they've had to deal with so many of the complicated sides of all of this. And so like in the end, it really largely became this film that's, I look at my films as sort of explorations. They're not linear in terms of the story. In the end, my goal and my whole team's goal is to be able to tell this complete story that has an emotional impact and intellectual impact that, you know, is desired. But the exploration that gets you there is very open-ended. And so this film in particular became this big in, you know, sort of study and exploration of how people deal with these two major inflection points in their careers. One being the kids, so both Sophie and Reed, who are considering, is this the career that I wish to commit my life to? Do I want to put all of this work and all of my eggs in this basket to be able to make this wine? Knowing how much work it is, having watched my parents do it the whole time and seeing what it's done in their lives. And then the other side is the juxtaposition of being on the other side, which is the parents realizing that, oh, wow, you know, we're aging out of the ability to be in sort of the primary position and the power position and the control side of this. And so what is it that comes after the, you know, that narrative about our identity wraps up? If I start to think about my life as not being Jeffrey Patterson, the winemaker at Mount Eden, but just Jeffrey Patterson, what is it that I get interested in? And to me, that's like such an interesting juxtaposition to be able to play between, sort of the opening of the chapter and then the closing chapter, and how the four characters that you're looking at that through are sort of dealing with those really, really big life-defining questions, you know?
Yeah, it seems like Jeffrey really values like stability in everything. And so to have that sort of generational change, and I think really with something as complicated as wine, it's not really just a handoff. It's not, okay, hey, you're in charge. Like there really has to be this audio term, but like a crossfade kind of like responsibility, and even, I mean, even winemakers I talk to, I mean, they're like, yeah, I've only been doing this, 46 vintages. Like I get to try every year, but it's been my entire life and get to do it 45 times. So you kind of need that slow kind of transition to really keep that stability and make sure that the handoff will be successful, or as success, give it the best chance of being successful. So
Definitely. And I think we sort of use that as sort of a guiding light in terms of the pacing and the tone of the film, Like, I think it is a purposefully slow film, because I think that, one of the things you had mentioned a little while back is that, Mount Eden is really known for its aging profile, right? It's really known for its aging ability, so that, a lot of their best vintages will last, 50 years and maybe even longer, who even knows? And so it felt as filmmakers that we had to honor that slow progression. It was one of the reasons that we really dedicated these 7 years to be able to track these stories, to be able to see actual progression in each individual character. And at the same time, the pace of the film is purposefully meant to be a little bit slower than your standard film that you're used to seeing these days, because for me, wine has always been a beautifully contemplative thing. Like I love, for me, when you have a great bottle of wine and you have it at dinner with friends or family, it sort of slows things down. And the best part about it for me, again, is not talking about all the different tasting notes and the flavors and the experiences and everything. It's actually what it facilitates, It like has this wonderful ability to sort of make people present. And, I find that you open a great bottle of wine and that's when you get these great stories that come out. Maybe you haven't heard this, story about, your father, your grandmother or something when they were in their 20s or whatever. And it's like that happens all the time. And it's facilitated by sort of this idea that like, oh, wow, I've got this, special, unique beverage that has also been aging and growing up to this moment, and now it is open, and maybe it's 25 years old, or maybe older, and that just like sort of puts everybody in this pretty cool mindset where they start to think about the larger things in life, and then the sort of a slower passage of time, and that's why I hope people kind of get out of the film. It really is meant to be a contemplative experience like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a great film to watch with a bottle of wine and let each kind of evolve together, I think.
That's the hope, man.
Yeah. I think one of the best characters in the film also is Andreas. Who I guess the vineyard foreman.
Yep. He's kind of the vineyard manager and the foreman of the crew. Yep.
Yeah, the part that he plays in the film is really interesting, I guess. Sure. Sort of a little bit of father figure, but then also like the continuity and somebody that's, soon enough he's going to be the longest term member probably at the ranch. You want to talk a little bit about how Andreas fits into the story?
I would love to. And, he's one of my favorite characters. And, I get that feedback so much, and it makes me so happy for a lot of reasons. So, one of the things that was always one of our passion points with this film was really, really showcasing the vineyard work that goes into it. And, Mount Eden has a dedicated full-time vineyard crew. They, don't just hire contract labor. They scale up sometimes for harvest, of course, but,
Sure.
They have a core group of people that have been there for years and years working on all of these vineyards and are dedicated to it. And so that was always something we were really, really interested in. Andreas has, he literally came there when he came from Mexico, and he got there when Reed was 6 months old. And so he's actually been there for the entire development of Reed's life, which is really, really a special thing, because he remembers Reed from when he was a baby, and he has watched him grow, and he has seen him through all of his different phases and developments. And, one of the things that becomes really clear that we look into is that he is sort of a surrogate father figure, because Andreas is a very different kind of person than Jeffrey is. And, he's able to connect with Reed after Reed decides to come back in particular. And really, he's probably the best person at being able to figure out what's the best way to be able to teach Reed how to actually do this, and how to work, with the equipment, how to work in the vineyards, how to manage the crew. And that's such an interesting thing, because everybody learns differently, and everybody, sort of sees things in different ways. And you get to explore this really beautiful interaction between, Andreas and Reed, where they have such a strong connection, a lot of it unspoken, where they just sort of understand each other. And it's such a cool exploration too of how you can expand the concept of family to be something that is more than just, the traditional definitions. Family is, I believe, about, the connections that are meaningful to you. And so you can have as strong of a connection with a friend or a coworker or something as you ever do with actually your blood connections. And I also love the different cultural perspectives, because, Andreas comes from Mexico, and so as a Latino male has a very, very different worldview and perspective. And Reed is, the owner, and, the owner's son. And it was just such I think it did end up being one of the more beautiful and profound storylines, to be able to explore the way that they connected and communicate, and also just the dedication that, Mount Eden really has to their vineyard crews, that they have, and the value of having the same people work in your vineyards, every single year after year, that it expands well beyond just the winemaker and maybe the viticulturalist. And it literally is a holistic approach where every single person that's working there plays this key part in being able to contribute to these great wines.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Reed and Andreas, Reed has probably seen Andreas more than he has any person except for his immediate family.
Yeah.
Likely. And there's the great moment where he's showing him how to fix the tractor, and it's a really great scene. just watch it. He's like, you instantly kind of feel the connection between the two.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this film ended up being, it's that intersection of the intimacy of work relationships, professional relationships, and family and personal relationships. And it gets so interesting and intertwined when you have a small family run business, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like they all just overlap, you know?
So you followed them for 7 years, and then is that total and kind of taking into account the everything that happens at towards the end of the film? Like were you cutting already as that went on?
I definitely was. And so there's we're not going to give any spoilers because it's way better if you see the film and don't know what happens. And one of the things that I find really challenging about making a feature-length documentary in particular about people that are living and actively engaged in their lives, it's really hard to find an ending.
Yeah.
It's really, and so many, of my favorite documentaries just kind of, just stop and they like cut to black and then they throw up the, titles of like, hey, Jeffrey's still out there riding his tractor and Reed is doing, and it's like you just sort of choose an arbitrary ending point because it's hard to find an ending. Mm-hmm. And so we were really cognizant of that, and we're hoping that we were going to be able to have something, sort of happen that would give us a natural framing device. And so we, life did happen, and a major event actually happens in the Pattersons' lives that, became this very natural framing device that it goes back to sort of the inflection point thing that I was talking about earlier, where once this event happened, which, we didn't know was going to happen or anything. And the film was a very different film up until that point. And then all of a sudden that happens and you have this like aha moment because first you sort of panic because it completely changes the course of your film and you're like, oh wow, nobody saw that coming. Nobody knew what was happening. And so you sort of freak out, but then once you calm down and, take a breather, you realize that, oh wow, like we can actually explore, using that as the framing device so that this moment in time that is a very, very impactful moment for all of these separate characters that we've been studying over all of these years, it is a natural conclusion because you are able to sort of use that as this point where we're all going to look at what's going on in our lives, what's led up to this moment, what could potentially happen after it, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's like, it's so weird because, I'm now working on other films and you can't replicate an experience like that. It just happens. And I don't necessarily want to wait around forever hoping that the, magic's going to strike again and a big inflection point that nobody saw coming is going to happen again. But it's, if you're open to it, it's a great way to be able to make a more complete story out of it because you then have a specific moment that actually, matters to be able to look at, all of these questions through.
Yeah, going into making a documentary with somebody that's still living and still engaged and present, like you are kind of relying on just faith a little bit that there's like that there's a story at the end of it and that you're not that you weren't just like hallucinating that there that there is, like you
totally
like you get into that edit and you're like, okay, like there's something here. So it must have felt good as you were moving along through that process that like you had something even before the kind of the twist.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I look at my craft somewhat similar to how I sort of look at winemaking, I think, and a great winemaker. I think your job is to be able to take these sort of natural elements that already exist and hopefully be able to elevate them to a really unique point. So in my particular craft, it's about taking people's individual personal stories and hopefully being able to weave them together and help them make these connection points so that those individual stories of these individual people are actually about something much larger that are relevant to, an entire, culture or, very specific field of study or, whatever it is. And I feel the same way, like it feels like most of the best winemakers that I've interviewed and gotten to sort of study, that's kind of the piece that they hang their hat on. It's the framing device, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the land and the terroir is the core story, but it's like, well, how do you blend the individual components of the individual plots to be able to help that story tell itself the best? How do you use something like, oak to be able to give it just that perfect amount of framing? And so, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of that's how I approach the art form. And especially when I'm making a movie about, winemakers, as I try and somewhat mimic the experience that the, craft that the people are actually doing in the film, so that is a natural flow to it,
Well, it's really well done. Like the production value, super high. Love the sound design, mix, music is great throughout. And did you cut it yourself or work with a?
So yeah, so I
okay.
Yeah, so I cut the film myself. I cut, almost all of the work that I do myself. I'm in my next film. I think I'm going to get an editor because it's a heavy lift doing that. I got a tremendous amount of help, obviously, on the music. I worked with a great composer I've worked with for years named Alex Kelly, and we've worked very, very closely on a wide variety of projects. And Alex is, we've got a cool yin and yang thing going, which I really enjoy because Alex is a incredible, knowledgeable, classically trained, cellist and pianist. And he just, literally knows his knowledge of classical music is amazing. And I sort of bring this great knowledge of cinematic music. I love cinema. And so I mostly actually watch narrative films more than I even watch documentaries, because I find that a lot of, narrative films, you really get to explore sort of cinematic language, which is, kind of where the sound design component falls into it. And so that's, some of my passion. And so it was fun working out sort of the cinematic references to the music and then mixing it with the, more classical approach that Alex has. But he also is sort of unique in the sense that he has this great classical understanding, but his favorite thing is to play jazz. Like he actually does, he plays a lot of cello in, sort of jazz trios, and also with, a couple of prog rock bands and all this kind of stuff. So he loves improvisation, which is somewhat unique in the classical world. A lot of, great classically trained cellists are, literally written music only, and they're amazing at, performing that, but they're not improv people. So, I'm stoked that you responded well to the music, because we spent a lot of time thinking about it filmically and coming up with themes for the individual characters and the individual storylines that evolve as the storylines evolve, so that, you know, you get that emotional connection and you see the different instrumentations create sort of different tonalities and emotions based on the emotional story or the emotional aspects of the story that you're in, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done, and really helps just, yeah, I guess kind of hold it together and, you know, drive it forward and support the story. So, are you able to say anything about your other project that you're working
Yeah,
on?
sure. So yeah, my current film that I'm working on is, you know, it's interesting. It, you know, part of it is sort of that, you know, thing that we started to see with Andreas. And so we're actually working on this film about this organic farmer who's down in Watsonville, and he's a Mexican immigrant. He's been here for 40 years, and he's got a really, really interesting worldview and perspective on American culture, especially right now. And, you know, he basically has a 70-acre plot of land where, you know, he's producing some of the best berries that, you know, I've ever had, as well as, I mean, he makes so many different things. You know, he's got regenerative, and one of the things that is sort of the guiding light for him and the, you know, community of farmers that he's also working with is, in regenerative farming, it's largely about biodiversity. You have as much biodiversity as possible, as the healthiest way to be able to have your soil, you know, stay healthy. And, you know, what you see in a lot of agriculture these days is, you know, monoculture, and you see very, very large agribusiness. And a lot of the time we're substituting, you know, soil biology for soil chemistry. We're trying to, you know, sort of fake, you know, the natural impacts of Mother Nature, or try to, in order to trick the land to be able to produce the singular crop. And so we're actually doing a juxtaposition of the value of, you know, having biodiversity for both the land, for the crops, actually for your financial pockets, way better to be able to grow as many crops as possible, because then it's not such a seasonal business. You don't have to sit around and, you know, wait all year for your peaches to be able to ripen, to be able to sell them. You can sell a lot of different things throughout the year, and sort of make that juxtaposition of the value of having, you know, cultural diversity. You know, America's one of those countries that's really been founded on, you know, immigration and having cultural diversity. And I think at this point in time in particular, it's really important for us to, you know, take a step back and take a look into the value that we get from having this incredible melting pot of all of these different cultural aspects that have fed into our communities. So yeah, man, we've been working on it for about a year, and it's going really, really well. We're really, really excited. I'm hoping we're not going to spend 7 years working on this one. Should be able to do it a little bit quicker. Yeah, we're hoping to be able to finish it up and have it done by probably the end of next year is our goal.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds exciting and timely also. And yeah, I mean, also Watsonville, they do grow some great berries and apples and lots of stuff down there.
Very great. I mean, it's like 75% of all domestic raspberries are grown in Watsonville, in the whole country. You know, it's a great place for berries, and it's cool. It's interesting, like working with Javier's. He's actually starting to get to the point where he's actually trying to educate consumers on differentiation, much like you get in the wine industry, where you actually have different varieties. Like you get to go to Javier's farm and he grows, 7 or 8 different varieties of strawberries. You get to taste them and you can have a preference. And it's one of those things that's been treated as a commodity for such a long period of time that you just go to the store and you're like, well, I'm going to get strawberries and I'm either going to get conventional or organic. Well, as you would imagine, that, just like in wine, there's so many different varieties and they all have different sweetnesses and textures and size. I mean, there's everything in there.
Some you can cook with, some not.
Oh, exactly. Some could travel, some could last a couple of days, some can't. Maybe, you like a earthier berry with, a little bit more acidity. This is, the kind of thing for you. Or maybe you really, really just love the sugar bomb, sweetness. And so it's like, it's fun to be able to bring a lot of that knowledge that I have learned just from working in the wine industry and see other produce that's starting to figure that out and help educate the consumer in being able to get differentiation of value, because that's also the best way to be able to get somebody to pay the appropriate amount for those actual berries that you produce. He also pays his laborers more than, the standard going rate. And because he, was one when he started and he knows how hard that is to be able to make ends meet. And so that's another thing that you're supporting when you support this, this farm. And so I think all of those things are really, really important to be able to highlight so that people understand that, sustainability is much larger than just like, hey, does it have plastic? What is it doing to the land? It's the holistic side of it so that it's making sure it's also, making a good living for all the people that are working for this particular company and that they're treated well and having a good experience as well,
Yeah, and with the farming style that people are staying healthier also and able to just live better lives overall.
Yeah.
Where can people watch Eden?
So yeah, Eden, we have a distributor. It's called Gravitas Ventures, and as of right now, basically you can rent it anywhere where you rent stuff on video on demand. So if that's Amazon Prime or Google Play or Apple TV, wherever you choose to rent things from your home. Easiest place to be able to find it really is our website, which is edenfilm.info. And we have direct links on that website to be able to see all of those different places where you can rent it. We do screenings. We've done some pretty cool experiential screenings where we've paired it with wine tastings and dinners, and they've been really, really popular. And we've got a couple in the works, nothing that is firm right now, but in the next couple of months, if you keep checking back on our website, you'll be able to see those different screenings as they pop up, because it's as you've mentioned, Matt, it's very much an experiential film. When you get to see it in the theater, it's so immersive because you really feel like you're in the vineyards and you're really experiencing what this is like. And then also the sound design, which was, one of the things that you had mentioned. We spent a tremendous amount of time and effort on making that an immersive experience where it's a 5.1 mix and you literally the tractors drive behind you and then there's leaves being picked and berries being picked and sounds are all around you, and it's just I really love showing the film in the theatrical experience because when you sort of get in the dark room and hopefully turn your phone off and give over your full commitment to it, it's a film that really rewards that kind of attention. I mean, as a film guy, I think that about almost any film. It's better than the theatrical experience. I'll be fully transparent, but I don't know. This one in particular is really sort of made for a theatrical. So,
yeah, and I mean, I watched it in my living room. Full disclosure, but I feel like some of those like vista shots, like standing over Silicon Valley, must look super just amazing on a big screen.
Sure.
Almost like you're gonna fall over the edge.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a wild view up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
It's
and
kind of a view.
You're right.
You just don't see it, I mean.
No. I mean, like, seriously, you asked me at the beginning of this conversation, like, what was it that really attracted me to Mount Eden? That maybe is it, dude. It's like, if you ever get the chance to go up there, and now they do, semi-private tasting, so you can book a tasting up there. But it's like, if you ever get a chance to go, it's such an amazing view. The second you get out of your car, it's like, it literally is on its own mountaintop, and it has no neighbors. And, there's other things on other ridges. I mean, ironically, Ridge Vineyards is on the next vineyard, ridge over. And then the one next to it is the Mountain Winery, which was Paul Masson's winery and is now famous as the music venue. You can hear concerts from, Mount Eden when they're going
really?
to Mount
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But it's like, you could, they can play their music as loud as they want. They can do whatever they want up there because there's no neighbors to be able to hear it. And that's really just quite unique in terms of terroir in general. But it's also just cool to know that, like, all of the, fruit that goes into the 3 Mount Eden wines comes solely from that estate. That is it, It really is one singular, expression of earth. And there it is,
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And those are really 3 grapes too. Like the Santa Cruz Mountains does so well. It's kind of I feel like the big 3, historically speaking, for the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Sure. Yeah, the Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay, and the Cabernet. But it's also really unique. I mean, you're hard pressed to find another estate at their level that's able to produce all 3 of those at that level. The Pinot Noir and Chardonnay you find all the time. You find a lot of Chardonnay and Cabernet too, but all 3 of those, it's such a like California thing because you're never going to find that in France, right?
Yeah,
you're never. It isn't happening, And so it's just, I love that part because that's the sort of that rogue, wild card side of the Santa Cruz Mountains and just American wine in general, where there are no like, specific rules about what you can or can't do. You could, you could find Nebbiolo up there if you want, man. You can.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't know. Probably not, but it's just interesting. You don't have those, sort of AVA restrictions as to what you can plant and what you can't do. You do whatever you want. And then the consumer gets to decide whether or not it's any good and whether it was a good idea.
Yeah, and it's funny even reading like the history of the Santa Cruz Mountains winemaking. I mean, it's always been kind of like that. It used to be so tough to get to, and people's carriages overturn on the road, and like you really had to kind of work to get there. So
sure,
I think it's always had a little bit of that, like you said, like roguish character.
Sure. When they first planted Mount Eden, there was Riesling up there too. Martin Ray, who originally planted it, he wanted to do what he considered the 4 noble grapes. He wanted his Pinot, his Chard, his Riesling, and his Cab. And so like the Riesling Mount Eden, I've never had it, but that's like one of those ultimate unicorn wines. By the time Jeffrey got there, In 81, they were down to like, I don't know, maybe, I mean, less than half of a row still
Oh,
left
wow.
of
Okay.
Riesling. They
Okay.
had, they would have, I don't know, maybe 10 plants or something, that kind of thing,
Okay.
10 vines. And so just, it wasn't worth it to be able to keep it. But Jeffrey's had it. He said it was actually good Riesling. So,
Okay.
you know, you never know. For anybody who's a wine collector out there, if you ever find that Mount Eden Riesling, I'd be interested to try it, man. I'd love to know.
Yeah. Man, that seems like a tough one to track down.
I think
There's
it's really tough.
somebody's cellar, some old
Somebody's
Santa
got it,
Cruz
man.
citizens
Yeah.
got it around though.
Yeah.
Yeah, Martin Ray was a hell of a character up on that mountain.
We could have
I
made the
think.
whole movie about Martin Ray. It would have been very different, but he was something. He really was something. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's so many wild stories about that guy, and he was a real unique dude. He was a very Santa Cruz Mountain guy. Santa Cruz Mountains has always had those sort of rogue characters, sort of the Randall Graham style people that just, march to their own beat or whatever. But he was something, man. He was pretty unique.
I was at UC Davis. I was looking through old papers. I came across this letter that he had written to somebody, and he said, "You're never invited here for dinner again because you're friends with this other person I dislike." It's I think
Yeah.
this probably.
Yeah,
I
dude.
mean, that probably wasn't the only person he did that to, but the stories like that,
No.
where,
There's a lot of stories like that. I think yeah, I mean this one I don't even know. I think Ellie told me this, that apparently Warren Winiarski, right? Is that how you
mm-hmm.
say his last name? I can never remember how to
Yeah,
pronounce his last name. But he was a huge Mount Eden fan. And
mm.
so, before he started Stag's Leap, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
He's a Stag's Leap guy. So
yep,
he came out and had dinner, and I think he even worked worked like a harvest with Martin Ray. But Martin Ray was just so challenging that he was like he had idolized those wines and he wanted to go work there. And they worked that one vintage, and he's like, no, I'm out of here. And then he goes and he does Stag's Leap. So which ends up being the bottle shock,
yeah. Judgment of
Paris
Paris,
tasting
and
wine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like a never meet your heroes type situation.
So,
It feels like
totally. Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, he was I think he was a good winemaker, but yeah, he was a wild, crazy businessman because by the end of his tenure at Mount Eden, it was called Martin Ray Vineyards, I think, at that point. And he had just made all these really terrible business deals with all these different investors because he was trying to do anything to be able to get enough capital to be able to probably just keep it afloat, but continue planting because he just wanted to keep expanding his vineyard properties. And so everybody had between 5 and 7 and maybe 8% of the company.
okay.
And everybody was getting bidders. Nobody could get out. Nobody could get liquid. And so they just kicked him out. And they're just like, you know what, you're done, because he didn't have a majority at all. He probably, I don't know how much he had left, but not much. And so then they had for years before the Pattersons got there, this was, I believe about a, 6 or 7 year process. Every year the winemaker would change, and they had some really amazing winemakers come through there. Like Mary Edwards was the winemaker there for a year.
Okay.
That was her first job out of UC Davis before she went up
Wow.
and started Mary Edwards. And Fred Peterson. So Fred Peterson was actually the guy that hired Jeffrey, and so he was the winemaker when Jeffrey got there. And so the wine was always really great in the sort of mid to late 70s there, but it just the corporate culture there was so much infighting, and it was just a really toxic place that people were like, no, I can't do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of there's a lot of
Yeah.
that kind of stuff that you know, you find that in the wine industry all the time.
Yeah.
It can get kind of ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mandavi's and kind of probably the most famous version of that, but there's been
I
many
think
others.
so. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Is there anything that we kind of missed or glanced over that you'd like to discuss
I don't know.
or get a word in about?
Not necessarily. I guess like, yeah, we talked about some of the filmic aspects and that kind of thing, which, yeah, like I'm like a total film geek. Like,
Yeah.
we talked about, and so I could talk about like, film and how the film was made and, the process and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah, I'd love to hear anything about that.
yeah. Sure, man. Like, like sound, like I know that, that's what you do in your, your regular business. One of the things that we were thinking about a lot with this film that I gave my sound designer, and he was like, oh, wow. Terraforming,
Okay.
because that's kind of what making an estate is, right? Making an estate is literally terraforming. You're, taking this natural space and, you're, wiping out all the original natural elements and then, moving things around and then planting in these new, foreign elements. And then over years, the, vines they're started to become, the native elements and everything. And so we really tried to do a lot of work on thinking about like sort of the sounds of Earth and the sounds of the movement of Earth and terraforming. And so there's all of these like, there's all this intersection between sound design and, music. And it's hard to even know who came up with which one. I sort of know as I was there, and the people that did it, Richard Ross, who has been my sound designer, and he's got a studio up in Sebastopol called Threshold Studios.
Nice.
We worked very, very closely, and I've worked with Richard again that's probably actually my longest standing, professional relationship. I think I've worked with him for like 18 years at this point, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a long, long time. And it was just so fun getting to do those kind of explorations. It's like, dude, the sound design, I think we're up to like 265 tracks in the film,
Yeah.
They
I
just
believe
add
it.
up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you
do.
can. Like that's what you do, man.
Yeah.
And it's like, and people don't, I remember the very first time I ever made a film was actually a, short film, and it was a narrative film. It was a Western that I made called The Silence. And I made it down in Los Angeles, and we got really, really lucky that my producer was able to get this, sound designer. His name is Hugo Derward. I'm so bad at French, so I'm sure I butchered. I'm sorry, Hugo. I know I butchered your last name, bro. So he had just come over from France and, done multiple features and everything, was trying to establish himself in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And so he gave us this incredible deal. It was almost free, it was just a student. And it's like, I really didn't know anything about sound design. And I had like really, really studied cinema. Like I was, very, very deep into all the classics, all the, Fellini and the Tarkovsky and the, Ingmar Bergman and I really knew cinema, or I felt I did, but I wasn't thinking about sound. And so like we handed the film over to him and, he's like, oh yeah, do you got notes? And we gave him a couple of notes or whatever. But most of it, like, we're just like, I don't know, man, have fun with it. Just, try different things. I'd be interested to know what your interpretation of this was. And, we worked on it for, a week or so and then brought it back, and it was like a, 15-minute film. And I will never forget that first time that I, came into a studio and I sat down and I watched, and I saw it because we had a bunch of score. It was like, it wasn't like wall to wall score, but it was probably 75% scored or whatever. And it just score everywhere. And he eliminated almost all of the score. And instead he did all of these really interesting sound elements like wind and like everything that, he would do with, sort of the movement of Earth, sort of that terraforming thing that I was talking about.
Yeah.
And, the flow of water, all of these different like sort of elemental things. And it had never occurred to me that that's such a large part of the filmmaking process. And I opened my eyes, and ever since then, I've just been like absolutely fascinated by it. Like so many of like, especially like dream sequences, right?
Right.
Like so much of that is about the sound design, dude. And it's really fun when you start to see and understand that,
Yeah, it's fun on my side to like dig into those projects like that where you can kind of choose your own adventure a little bit or like kind of explore a little bit. It's nice to be able to do things. Yeah, it's funny. It's one of the big changes like in the business since COVID, really, where there's so much more like unsupervised time, at least in my part of the industry. It used to be like 3, 4, 5 people sitting behind you the entire time, and nobody could envision ever doing it like a different way. Like this is just how it was done, and it was how it was done when I was an intern and an assistant, and it was just like
how I learned it. This is what it was.
And then it's kind of there's so much more time now where it's unsupervised. Like, hey, here's the prep. Do your thing. Send it to us, we'll have some notes, and people will still come in a lot for, sometimes it's like the heavy lifting day or sometimes it's the final day, but you get a little more time to explore than you used to, like pre-COVID with everybody kind of sitting behind you and you feel like a little cramped or like, you can't... Sure.
You can't express yourself. You can't try something.
You can't take that like dead end too many times.
Sure, man.
Nowadays, you can a little bit more.
I find that one interesting. I always like, if somebody asks me what's the like biggest innovation that's changed cinema, kind of in my lifetime, and I would really say it's nonlinear editing, because once we got to that point when it used to be that, I remember when I, actually first went to film school, I was like one of the last classes that still got to actually cut on a Steenbeck 16 millimeter, like physically cut film, you tape it together, splice it, that whole deal.
Yeah.
And then, all of a sudden you get to nonlinear editing, which is what you have now. It's a digital realm where it's wide open space and you can literally do anything. And I think that's the biggest change that has changed the art form, because when you used to have to work with a physical product of like, no matter how many work prints you had and you're like actually working with it, you kind of could only experiment so much because you literally had to like tape it and then you'd like pull it apart and then try another thing again. Whereas now I can have like, 250 different versions and I can just have a wild night and get crazy and do something super rogue, and it doesn't affect the major project. You just save another version and just go crazy with it. And it's like, that's why, it's one of the reasons I think that cinema got like so cutty in particular. It's like, you just can't even imagine,
it's very easy to make a cut now. It's just
right. It's so easy. It's the one button to layer images, right? Yeah. Like to be able to, do opacity and like different layered images and different, like, like a dissolve was an optical effect. Like that's one of the things that's really important for people to understand. It cost a bunch of money. You literally, when it was film, you actually like had to take like a, wax pen and like draw, I want this many frames on the in, this many frames on the out to be able to do that crossfade. And if you were wrong, like it literally, they had to print that in the printer. And so if you were wrong, too bad. Like you only got one shot at doing it. Like you can like do digital dissolves forever. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it gets so crazy. And the same is true with sound design, right?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about those. I mean, I have cut tape, but only it was like a couple special projects where it was kind of
Sure.
part of the deal, part of the
Yeah.
design that they wanted. But
Yeah, the
you used to
aesthetic, sure.
get more breaks, or breaks would come differently because you'd kind of get to the end of the reel and have to rewind it. You stand up, or
Yeah.
like, I mean, one of
You
the guys is
walk
saying
around.
like, yeah, you walk around, or one of the guys is saying, like, oh yeah, so and so would always go out and have a cigarette while the
Sure.
assistant was like switching over to the next reel and stuff like that. But we were kind of talking about it in like just fatigue, or like taking the importance of trying to take breaks sometimes, and
Oh,
not just
totally.
sit down and then stand up like 8 hours later.
What's funny is like I always say to my clients, and nobody ever listens and believes me. It's fine, but I still say it anyway. It's like I'm not paid to sit in front of the computer and push the buttons. I'm paid to think. And it's like you could sit in front of the computer as a technician or in front of your console and technically, make a bunch of cuts all day long. The thing that actually is important about what you do is the contemplation side. And for me, most of the time, my sort of, breakthroughs that help us figure out how to deal with challenging sequences don't come when I'm sitting at the console with somebody breathing down my neck.
Yeah.
They come when I'm like walking my dog or surfing or, whatever, eating a taco or something.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that's a really valid and important point for people to remember. There is a significance to the brain being able to reset when it gets out of the sort of craft space of actually actively working on your craft and taking a step back and going somewhere else where you're still thinking about it 24/7 in the back of your head.
Yeah. I think for me, it always helps to, like, even if I don't start working on something, even if I just see the picture or rough cut or something, it just, you kind of let it just rattle around in the back of your head, and you come
Sure.
up with many more ideas usually than if you like see it and then just like forced to sit down and tackle it right away. So yeah, like you said, it's not really like how long you can work, it's kind of what you can make of that time that you're working.
It
And
totally is. And it's such a weird one because it's based on a day rate or an hourly, right? And it's like somebody's like purchasing you for a day or a hourly thing. And it's super hard. Like in a creative endeavor, it's like sometimes it just happens and, the magic just happens. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. And so it's harder to like, figure that out.
yeah, I think at the beginning it was something that was real tough for me. I think I'm a lot better at it now, like it's just
Yeah.
with years of practice, like that.
Sure.
I can do like reasonably well, like just see it and like analyze it, and okay, this is where we're going, at least to start, have some immediate ideas. But I always feel more comfortable if I can let it just rattle around in my head a little bit before.
Totally, man. And I think that's just naturally human. It's like, when you just are only going shooting from the hip, it gets a lot harder. And I think to me, that's just sort of I don't know, sort of tie this back to, this craft and then also winemaking. I think it's really important to let things breathe and think about buying yourself the time to not just be in there in the weeds knocking things out all the time. Like I love the the exploration nature. I mean, one of the things that's really cool for me about, making my feature length films is that I have a day job that, I'm working on all these projects where those people are knocking on the door and being like, hey, we better deliver that. So
Yeah.
those people get to do that. These are the kind of things that I get to like let rattle around in the back of my head a little bit. And it's so cool to be able to see what can happen when you really allow something to breathe and evolve. So,
Yeah. Not not forcing it. I think it's probably kind of like an overriding theme with a lot of the winemakers I interview. Especially I interview so many that are kind of on the more natural or lower intervention side, and
Sure.
it's like taking away that thing that you have to do something right then, like that, like kind of having that restraint, I guess, to maybe kind of let something go a little bit, let it breathe, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like, I find a lot of people talk about faith. It's about having faith. And it's like, to some people, faith is a very like religious thing, which I understand that's not necessarily the piece that I'm talking about. We even talked about it a little bit with this film. You go through a process like this, you spend so much time, working on it. You have to be able to have faith in your process that you will eventually be able to get to that end narrative that's going to make sense. And I think, especially in like low intervention winemaking, which tends to be my favorite kind of wine, as a result, it's maybe just having faith that, it's gonna ferment. It's like it doesn't need yeast additions. It's taken a little longer, but it's going to actually be able to complete its fermentation. And a lot of that is just like forcing yourself not to interject and help the thing along to, have the more control.
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think
that's
some of
really
it's like having that confidence that you've kind of done everything you can to help something succeed. Like in the case of winemaking, that the grapes have been farmed well, that you have the right variety on the right ground, you made the right picking decision, and you've handled them carefully, kind of like that you've done all you could to
decision
make
making. Yeah.
the process succeed. And I think the same with the film, probably, that that you're out there doing the work, shooting footage, thinking about it, and trying to really capture what's going on. And there is faith that you have to put in it, but hopefully you have some confidence in the faith from kind of putting everything in like in a place to
Blind faith
succeed,
is a totally different thing. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Blind faith that can be a real problem. That's, yeah. You have to have had the experience and you have to have a process. I think, that's always something that I am really fascinated with when I'm talking to, any crafts person, is what is your process? That's the only thing I can really replicate. It's not that I can guarantee you what the end product is going to be or what the finished story is going to be, but I can, sort of guarantee that if we follow this specifically designed process that has been, fine-tuned over many, many years and many projects and many experiences, we will be able to, arrive at a comfortable landing space, because there are processes, there have to be, or else, like, I mean, I've talked to so many people that, like, you can't just show up with a camera somewhere with literally no idea what story it is and just like assume that you're going to be able to make a film. Like, you have to have a very unique perspective and point of view that you're choosing to look at it from. And then you also have to be really, really open to adapting that point of view based on the reality of the stories and the people and their lives that are unfolding in front of you. You have to be very, very receptive and adaptive to those narratives. And to me, that's one of the best parts. It's really fun because it's like, when I first started trying to make, sort of narrative films, I got overwhelmed by the blank slate, by the infinite possibilities. And the thing I love about sort of where I've landed in terms of making, documentary films in a more, cinematic, language driven manner is that I only have certain things to be able to work from. I can't tell my story unless I can get my characters to be able to tell their story through the interview pieces and the imagery that we have. That's the only story I get the opportunity to be able to tell. And so then it's like taking all of these cool and amazing stories that exist in front of you and figuring out how, when interwoven in a interesting way, you can make them sort of more relevant to somebody that literally doesn't know anything about their particular experience or craft or whatever.
Yeah, and it feels like with documentary, you're really kind of like carving back and just trying to get, like, oftentimes a lot of documentary filmmakers, I know at least, I mean, you have a lot of footage. You really never know when that thing is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen again, most likely. And so
Yeah.
you just have a lot of footage. And so it's like that just like trimming process and really like honing down into what the story is, and being able to kind of cut away all that fat and other stuff that you don't need.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the lowest and hardest point making the film, was to be able to get the very first assembly. And this was well before, the major plot twist happened or anything. But I was like so in the weeds because there's so much footage and so many different possibilities of threads that we were going through, because we didn't have a framing device. We didn't have a continuous narrative. We had all these different narrative threads that we could potentially explore. And then you try and piece them all together and be like, oh, okay, if we had a little bit more of this, that would maybe be able to piece this together. And so I did bring in an assembly editor named Manuel Antolin. She was great because I really don't know if I ever could have actually done the first assembly, which was a, probably 4-hour film, but it at least gave me something to work from. And once I had that string out, then it's like, okay, I could come through and start to actually cut out individual components and move things around. But until I had that, it was a nightmare, man, trying to think about what it could be,
Yeah, it could feel kind of overwhelming, I guess, in some ways. Just better than staring at a pile of tapes, but you're kind of staring at a pile of hard drives and footage.
Pretty much, man. Yeah.
Yeah, that's well, it came out really great, and should be really proud of it. And I think any wine fan will love the film. And I mean, it's really bigger than a wine story also. So I think it can transcend that. So you can watch it with other folks that aren't, so into wine also.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we tried to make a film that was like, the kind of film I would get interested in before I was into wine, and it would maybe spark something in me personally of like, oh, this is why the intellectual development and journey into wine is worth it. And so, yeah, it's fun watching with people who don't know anything about wine. And it's always just really fun watching with people because everybody brings their own narratives and their own baggage to the family dynamic side of it. Because pretty much everybody has a family, right?
Yeah.
Everybody understands the different complexities of how those relationships work.
Yeah, everybody's going to have a different character they kind of relate to.
Oh, totally. Different one, I can't stand that person. It's always interesting to hear. It's like, whoa, okay, I get it. You just gotta be. I'm very open. I understand.
Yeah,
just funny. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks for taking the time with me. This was great. I'm glad we were able to make it happen, and I really enjoyed the film. It's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt. It was such a pleasure to get to talk to you, and it was such a fun time chatting. I really appreciate your perspective on the film, and I hope your listeners get a chance to watch it and see what they think.
Yeah, I think they'll love it. So
awesome, very cool, awesome,
cool.
Well,
thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much, man.
Thanks for listening today. Chris has captured a great film, and I think it can be enjoyed by wine lovers and others, but you'll probably get a little extra out of it if you crack a good bottle and watch it down. You can find it at edenfilm.info and follow the film at instagram.com/eden.docufilm. Please follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. You can email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com or Instagram with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast helps a lot too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses, keeps it ad-free, available for everyone, allows for more episodes, and helps support independent folks doing cool things. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.